I am very super excited about the series that I'm going to begin today, for this is absolutely a favorite subject of mine. The title of the message is God Revealed in Grammar. God Revealed in Grammar. I eat, drink, and breathe language. I can honestly say to you that I don't know a day that goes by that I do not at some point peer in a dictionary to find out the meaning of a word. Now, I want to say at the outset, please do not be intimidated by this subject. When I announced to some of my grandchildren what I was going to be talking about, oh no, I hate grammar. So please do not be intimidated by it. I will endeavor to make it as simple as I can, not implying that you are simple-minded. You say, what is the difference? It's complicated. Anyway, no, seriously speaking, if you are, as I was, we took grammar in school, we did it, passed the test, maybe, got the grade, got out, and forgot it. And figured, what do I need with this? Because I know how to communicate, and I understand when people are talking to me. Why do I need to know about main clauses and dependent clauses and conjunctions and subordinating conjunctions and adjectives and adverbs and nouns and pronouns and all of this kind of stuff? I know how to talk. I know how to understand language, and that is true. And I was the same way. I took Latin when I was in high school. Latin is highly inflected, a lot of changes in the words depending on how they occur in the sentence. And I know I learned that stuff and I made good grades, but I forgot it all. But then when I went to college, as you know, I started studying foreign languages. German was my major study and French was my minor study. I have taught myself Spanish, if you want to call it that. And I took 2 years studying the Russian language, and I also spent time studying the Chinese language under a tutor from China before I went there in 2011. So I have studied several different languages, and I can honestly say to you that it was in studying foreign languages that I really came to learn as much grammar as I know. Because I read in 4 languages. I read in English, of course. And at breakfast every morning, I read in one of my foreign languages. On Monday, I will read in French. On Tuesday, in German. Wednesday, in Spanish. Thursday, in French. Friday, in German. And Saturday, back into Spanish. And in order for me to be able to read into those languages, I need to have some command of the language. So that when I'm reading the story, I can tell whether they're talking about something in the past, or something in the present, or something in the future, or how they're describing or interrelating things. If I don't have some knowledge of the grammar, then I wouldn't be able to do what I do. I've had to learn that in order to be able to read with understanding and also to effectively communicate with people when I'm speaking one of those languages. So that's really where I have come to learn a lot that I have about grammar, and I thank God for the time I've spent studying foreign languages. They personally fascinate me. It's a hobby, but I honestly believe, in fact, I don't just believe, I know it has helped me to understand my own language better, and with that to be able to understand my Bible better. So let me first of all define a dictionary definition of grammar, and then I want to read a section of an article from the 1974 edition of the World Book Encyclopedia that gives an excellent explanation of the function of grammar and language, and I think you'll be able to understand this. But let me get the definition. Grammar is the department of the study of language which deals with its inflectional forms. Now just stop. You probably don't even know what that's talking about, do you? That big word inflectional simply means the forms of the words change depending on how they're used in the sentence. Notice, for example, the word speak. If I say in the present tense, I speak. If I speak in the past tense, I spoke. Did you notice the word changed, the way it was spelled? If I use the present perfect tense, I say I have spoken. See the change? That's what you mean by inflection. If I tell you this man is tall, but this man is taller, notice I changed the spelling of the word, that's inflection, but this man is the tallest of the three. That's grammar. It's how words occur in sentences and how they change forms depending on how they're used. And that's what we mean that grammar deals with its inflectional forms. And it is, so grammar is the department of the study of a language which deals with its inflectional forms or other means, listen, of indicating the relations of words in the sentence and the rules for employing these, that's these relations of the words, in accordance with established usage. To put it succinctly and clearly and simply, grammar talks about how we take the words we know and we link them together in sentences to express our thoughts. That's what it is. It's how we put words together in order to make ourselves understood. Now listen to this piece of an article from the World Book Encyclopedia. Grammar is a set of language principles. It's the rules that you learn in school that you just love. I speak as a fool. Grammar is a set of language principles that people follow in order to make themselves understood. I don't care if you know squat about grammar rules. Every single one of you uses them. You have to be understood. A language communicates in at least two ways. First, it uses words with meanings. Words have become symbols for certain ideas, and users of a language generally agree about the meaning of a word. Users of English, for example, agree to associate the word wolf, W-O-L-F, with a certain dog-like carnivorous animal. That word wolf, with those four letters, is a symbol of this animal that we all understand what we're talking about. It's the kind of a dog you don't want to go up to and pet. We get that. Whereas users of the French language agree on a different symbol. Loup, L-O-U-P, loup. You say, well, where's the P? They don't pronounce it. That's one of the strange things about French. They very often do not pronounce the consonants at an end of a word. Loup, which means to represent the same object. So when a French person hears loup, his mind thinks of the same animal your mind thinks of when you say wolf. That is the symbol of that particular animal. But language not only communicates by words that have meanings that we all agree on and understand, language also communicates in a second way by putting words together to show how ideas are related. That's what grammar is. It's how we glue the words together to communicate our ideas. A word like wolf almost never appears by itself. If I just get up here and say wolf, okay, fine, I know what that is. What are you trying to say? I obviously need something else besides just saying wolf. Unless we're in the woods and there's one over there and I say wolf, then you will get the idea from that. But just here we are in a room of people with none around that I know of. And so if I just say wolf, then you're going to say, wolf what? See, I need more. I need to string some other words with that for you to know what I'm talking about. That's what we mean by grammar. So it is a word like wolf almost never occurs by itself. It is related to other words as part of a sentence and often as part of a paragraph. Grammar is a description of this second way in which language communicates. It is a body of statements that describe how words work together in sentences, how we put our words together to communicate our thoughts. Now, this I think is really good. Neither of the two ways of communicating, word meanings and grammar, will work without the other. Consider the following group of words arranged in alphabetical order. That is, by the first letter in every word. You start and arrange them in alphabetical order. Had lady old swallowed the wolf. Had lady old swallowed the wolf. The meaning of each word is clear. You all use those words all the time. You know what they mean. But the words do not make sense as a group because we do not know how they are related to each other. If the words are rearranged so that we can tell how they are related, then we can tell who does the swallowing and who gets swallowed. The sense of the group of words becomes clear. So let's take that list of words and arrange them grammatically, correctly. The wolf had swallowed the old lady. That's grammar, where you connect the words together so that they make sense. Now here's why this subject is important. Because God has chosen to reveal himself to mankind in a book of words that are arranged in sentences. You got that? Words glued together in sentences. This is how God has chosen to reveal himself to us. And the interesting thing, and this is a point I really want to work over today because this is fascinating. God has given to man the ability to communicate verbally in words and sentences. Let me show you this from the very beginning of man's creation. Turn to Genesis chapter 2. And I want you to see God giving man from the start. You see, when man was created, he did not have to learn how to speak a language. He was created speaking and understanding language. It is a gift from God. He has given to man the ability to communicate verbally. When I say verbally, that means with words. Verbally, in words and sentences. Now notice, verse 16. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. That's the first sentence that was ever uttered. It came from God. It was a complex sentence of several clauses written to man that he could obviously understand. Had he not been able to understand this communication, the law would have meant nothing to him, would it? God created man to be able to understand language, words, joined together, connected together grammatically to communicate information. And the Lord God said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make an helpmeet for him. And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto man to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. Here is Adam fresh from the hand of God, endowed with the ability to communicate in language that actually formulates the first dictionary in human history. He develops an extensive nomenclature to describe all the various animals in the animal kingdom that walked on the face of the earth and flew in the sky. That word nomenclature, it's just a fancy word that means the language, the words that belong to a particular field of study. All of us that have been to doctors and hospitals understand that they have a whole vocabulary they use that sometimes is difficult for us who are not educated in it to understand what they're talking about. Greg Oley used to send me the printouts that gave the results of his CAT scans when he would go in to have his tumors examined. And he would send me copies and I would read them. And I would have to call John Garlinghouse and say, please interpret, because I couldn't understand the nomenclature. And so here when we say nomenclature, we're just meaning that he formulates all these words that will be symbols of all these various animals. Now this was an intelligent man, wouldn't you say? Obviously had verbal skills, wouldn't you say, to invent all these words to describe these animals. And furthermore, value only if you remember the words, the symbols attached to the animals. But as yet, we have no record of Adam saying anything. We know that he obviously said things. He named the animals. But we don't have a record of him actually reciting those names. So up to now, we haven't had a record of anything Adam has said. We haven't heard him speak a sentence yet, but we're about to. And this is where it gets fascinating. And so, verse 20, let's read it again. And Adam gave names to all cattle and to the fowl of the air and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found an helpmeet for him. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof, which was the first surgery in human history performed by Almighty God before sin entered into the world. He took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman and brought her unto the man. And Adam said, and now we have the first recorded sentences by a human being in all of history. The first sentences uttered by a human being that we have a record of. And Adam said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Second sentence, we just finished the first. Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Then we're going to go over a little later and see in chapter 3, after the fall, we hear from Adam two more sentences, and they are these. He understands God. God comes to him and asks him a question in verse 9, where art thou? And he said, here's his third sentence, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. God responds. Adam understands the sentence. And he said, who told thee that thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I have commanded thee that thou shouldest not eat? Two questions. And the man said, fourth sentence, and these are the only recorded sentences from Adam that we have in the Bible. And the man said, the woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. Four sentences I just read to you. We'll come back to those in a moment. Now later on in chapter 3 it says, Adam called his wife Eve, the mother of all living. That's the Holy Spirit just telling us something Adam did. But we don't actually have a record of Adam saying that to her, to anyone else, or to God. It's just telling us about the fact he named her that. But we don't have a sentence where he says, hey Eve, come over here. All right. And so it is obvious from this verse that God gave man from the beginning the ability to communicate verbally and to receive verbal communication in words and sentences. Is that all plain and clear to all listening? Now this activity, this ability to communicate is essential to man being a rational creature. When I say a rational creature, I mean a creature that can reason, that can think through things. And we use language to reason, because by means of language we connect our thoughts to arrive at decisions and conclusions. Just think about that for a moment. You know it's true. That's how we reason. You think about things, you connect the thoughts together, and you make a decision. You come to a conclusion with those thoughts. That's reasoning. That's what we mean that man is a rational creature. And grammar is that department of language whereby we connect our words in that reasoning process and with which we express our thoughts. Every human being uses grammar whether they realize it or not. Every single one of you. You use nouns, pronouns, adjectives, adverbs, verbs in various tenses. You use main clauses, you use subordinating clauses, you use coordinating conjunctions, you use conjunctive adverbs. Whether you realize it or not, you all do it. It is essential to communication. The thing is, you just don't realize you're doing it. For example, I studied German. I didn't learn it by hanging around Germans. Some people do that. They'll go to Germany and they'll live in Germany for a while and they just kind of pick it up from hearing it. That's not the way I learned it. I learned it out of a book. I learned it by studying words, memorizing words, studying grammatical forms. And then, of course, practice came along with it to help me to improve in my ability to both read and speak the language. And they have a funny way that they express putting something somewhere. And in some cases, when they're describing the location of an object, they'll use one particular form of the definite article or indefinite article. They'll use it in the accusative case if they're talking about where it's located. Oh, pardon me, they'll use the dative case if they're just describing where it's located, and they'll use the accusative case when they're describing you putting it where it's going to be located. And I know you probably don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, that's fine. Neither did the German. Because I was explaining to this man the difference between when you use the accusative case and when you use the dative case, when you're talking about the location of a particular thing or how it gets to that location. And this is a guy that uses this grammatical stuff all the time, every day. And when I explained to him about it, I said, "Did you know this?" He said, "No." I've heard my German friend say to his friends, "He knows more about the grammar than we do." And that's true, because this is not the way we learned our language. We learned it by imitation. We didn't learn it grammatically. And like I say, when we took it in school, we figured, what do I need this for? We just get our grade, whatever it was, get out and forget about it, and get on with our lives. But whether you realize it or not, all of you use it. Now, it's interesting, we were made in the image of God. And God is a verbalizer. Obviously, God communicates. God can speak. He's a verbalizer. And we were made in the image of God, and being made in the image of God, we also were made to be verbalizers. People that are capable of verbal communication. And let me remind you again, when I say verbal communication, I'm simply saying communication in words. We don't just paint pictures, and we don't just make hand motions. We actually use words to communicate. And even deaf people that are unable to hear and therefore speak plainly, they have hand signs, but those hand signs are symbols of words. They are still communicating in words by means of their hand signs. So words are essential to communication, essential to our being rational creatures. Now, the interesting thing is that verbal communication, hear me now, is a part of the very essence of the God we worship and serve. One of the names of one of the persons of the Holy Trinity is the Word. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the word, by definition means verbal expression. God is the Word. God is verbal expression. 1 John 5:7, there are three that bear record in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Ghost. And these three are one. Every person in the Godhead, their very essence is verbal expression. And God, making us in His image, therefore made us capable of expressing ourselves in word, verbal communication. And in this way, God made man superior to the brute beasts. I'm talking about the animals. And the Bible describes them as brute beasts. Look at this. I'll just give you this verse in 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 12. But these as natural brute beasts, made to be taken and destroyed, speak evil of things they understand not, and shall utterly perish in their own corruption. The word brute simply means wanting in reason or understanding. Animals don't think rationally. They think instinctively, but they do not think rationally. And I talked about that before, so I don't want to get afield on that subject. But they lack the ability to communicate verbally like we do. They are brute beasts, wanting in reason and understanding. And God has made you as a human being superior to them in that you are capable of verbal communication and rational thought expressed in verbal communication. And it is for this reason that man's tongue by which he communicates, get this people, is referred to as his glory. Let me show you. In Psalm chapter 16, and this is a misprint in your outline. I got to go back and correct it. It's from Psalm 16 and verse 9. David says, therefore, my heart is glad, and my glory rejoiceth, and my flesh also shall rest in hope. Now, what does that mean? My glory rejoiceth. Well, this is one of the beautiful things about our Bible, is that it will oftentimes define its own terms. All we have to do is go over and look at this verse as it is quoted in Acts chapter 2 and verse 26, and it will explain what he means by our glory, or my glory rejoiceth. In Acts chapter 2 and verse 12, he's quoting this passage. Pardon me, Acts chapter 2 and 26. I'm sorry, I want verse 26. I saw a 12 up above it, and that's what my eye lit on. Acts chapter 2:26, where he's quoting Psalm 16:9. Therefore did my heart rejoice, and my tongue was glad. Notice, instead of saying my glory, he says my tongue was glad. And moreover, also my flesh shall rest in hope. So God refers to your tongue by which you communicate in words as your glory, because it is that which exalts us above the brute creation. In fact, if you think about what happens in language, you are seeing, people, the evidence of the glorious creating hand of God in endowing mankind with the ability to connect together and express themselves by means of language. But let me give you two other verses where it's very obvious that this word glory is referring to our tongue. Look at Psalm 30 and verse 12. Now, while you're turning there, here's a point that I find interesting. In your Bible, very often, the word tongue would be used to refer to a language. Remember on the day of Pentecost, they spoke with all these different tongues? Those were actual languages. Tongue is a synonym for language. It is interesting that in French, the word for the tongue, that thing that's flapping inside your mouth, is la langue. La langue. But that also happens to be the word for language. La langue. La langue. And it makes sense, because you speak your language with your tongue. Take your tongue out and you won't be able to talk. You can make grunts and sounds, but you won't be able to form the words that you do without your tongue. That's why your language is called your tongue. Then in Psalm 30 and verse 12, to the end that my glory may sing praise to thee and not be silent. Now this morning we were singing praise to God, but what were we using? We were using our tongues. And that tongue is your glory. It's marvelous. In Psalm 57 and verse 8, Psalm 57:8. Awake up, my glory. He's telling your tongue to wake up. Awake, psaltery and harp. I myself will awake early. I will praise thee, O Lord. He's calling upon his tongue to wake up to worship. The tongue representing language, the ability to communicate. This to me is so fascinating. Okay, we all speak English. And we speak it quickly. A foreigner trying to learn it would have difficulty understanding us because we talk so fast. I know. I have that problem when I'm trying to understand people in a foreign language I speak. Slow down, and maybe I'll get what you're saying. And we just do it so fast, and our minds just pick up on it like that. It's truly amazing. For example, I'd have gone out tomorrow. I'd have gone out tomorrow, but it was raining. How many of you in here understood what I just said? I'd have gone out tomorrow, but it was raining. Raise your hands if you understood what I said. I'd have gone out tomorrow, but it was raining. Most all of you knew exactly what I was saying. But you know what I was actually saying? I would have gone out tomorrow, but it was raining. Do you notice how I swallowed syllables, whole parts of those words? And instead of saying I would, I said I'd. Instead of saying have, I said oh. I would have gone out yesterday, but it was raining. No, it was raining. It was raining. You caught that was as I quickly ran over it and didn't even clearly enunciate the wa in the was. It was raining. But you all understood me, see? Isn't that fascinating? That we know our languages so well that our minds immediately pick up even when they're raced through and syllables are and whole parts of the words are eliminated. And they do that in all languages. And when you're trying to learn a foreign language, it can be so frustrating. I was with Manfred and Helga one time, my German friends, and they were looking for a parking place. And finding parking places in Berlin is a trial, let me tell you. They don't have a lot of them. They're not plentiful. And they were looking for a parking place, and Manfred and Helga were having a little squabble about something. And Manfred says to Helga, "De Glamine, de Glamine." Now imagine you're trying to learn German. What he was saying to her, "Du glaubst mir nicht. Du glaubst mir nicht," became "de Glamine." She knew what he was saying. See, we do, all languages do that. We learn it so well, we just whip through it. We can pick up whatever's missing from the sentence or the expression because we just know it that well. Now you can understand why your tongue is your glory. Our ability to communicate in language is every bit as much a manifestation of the glory of our God as a beautiful sunset or a brilliant starlit night or a majestic mountain range. This thing we do every day of our life, it's our glory. Our Creator has endowed with us with it. So man is made in the image of God as a verbalizer and capable of verbal communication. So now we're going to give you the meaning of the word communicate. Communicate means to give to another as a partaker, to give a share of, to impart, confer, transmit something intangible or abstract as light, heat, motion, quality, or feeling. But taking that general definition of to impart or to give a share of gets more specific when it applies to language. It means to impart information, knowledge, and the like, which is what we do with language. We're imparting information, knowledge. To impart or convey the knowledge of, to inform a person of, to tell. It's just exactly what I'm doing now. I'm communicating. I am giving you a share of my thoughts. I am sharing with you my thoughts. I'm letting you impart, or I'm imparting to you my thoughts. And then it also means to impart as a share, portion, or specimen, to give, bestow a material thing. And it's used both ways in the Bible, to refer to verbal communication and also to refer to such things as when you put money in my box back there. You're communicating. You're giving a share of what you have to me in compensation for what I give to you in the Word of God, in obedience to Galatians 6:6 that says, "Let him that is taught in the Word communicate unto him that teacheth in all good things." But the particular form of communication I'm zeroing in on today is verbal communication. Letting one partake of your thoughts by communicating them to another in words. Now here are verses, just a few of several that I could use, that deal with verbal communication. That's our subject today. In Matthew 5:37, for example, 5:37, Jesus said, "But let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. He's talking about things we say with our mouth in verbal communication. In Acts chapter 4 and verse 29. Let no corrupt communication. Now he's going to tell you what kind of communication he's talking about. Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. And then this is a really good one. Luke chapter 24, and it's going to lead me to my next word that I'm going to define. Luke chapter 24, verses 13 through 17. And behold, two of them went the same way to a village called Emmaus, which was from Jerusalem about 80 furlongs. And they talked, verbal communication. You see this? They talked together of all these things which had happened. And it came to pass. Now notice what they're doing while they're talking. Notice this. And it came to pass that while they communed together and reasoned, notice that they're using language to connect thoughts. While they're doing this, they're reasoning. You see, communication by words is an extremely important thing we do when we reason. And reasoned, Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were holden that they should not know him. And he said unto them, now he's talking about their discussion, their talking, their communing, their reasoning. He says, what manner of communication or communications are these that ye have one to another as ye walk and are sad? So notice that when people are engaged in verbal communication as these were, they are said to be communing. Communing. Now let me define the word commune. The word commune in obsolete senses, in which common was the more usual form. In other words, the word commune derives from our word common. And the word commune means to make common to others with oneself, to impart, share with. It means to communicate verbally, just as these men were doing, to tell, publish, report. Current senses now always commune, meaning to talk together, to converse. So when two people are engaged in conversation, they are communing. What are they doing? They're sharing their thoughts with one another by means of verbal exchange, verbal expression, communication. They're talking. Why do we call the Lord's Supper communion? Because we're all sharing together the bread, the wine in common, and the message that is communicated with those symbols. And so when you are engaging in verbal communication, you are communing by definition. Now notice these biblical examples of communing by verbal communication. I want to give you, there's several of them. I just want to give you a smattering of just a few. For example, in Genesis chapter 23 and verse 8, Genesis 23:8, speaking of Abraham, and he communed with them, saying, if it be your mind that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me, and entreat to me to Ephron the son of Zoar, that he give me the cave of Machpelah. He was out looking for a cemetery plot for his wife. He was in the market for one, and he finds these people, and he's telling them what he wants. And it's called communing. That's verbal communication called communing. This is a favorite of mine in Exodus chapter 25 and verse 22. Exodus 25:22, God talks about the mercy seat on the top of the Ark of the Covenant where he would take his seat. And he said, and there I will meet with thee, and I will commune with thee from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubims which are upon the ark of the testimony of all things which I will give thee in commandment unto the children of Israel. So when God from that mercy seat spoke his commandments, verbal communication of his commandments, he was communing by definition. 2 Chronicles 9:1. This is a good one. Well, they're all good. 2 Chronicles 9:1. And when the queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon, she came to prove Solomon with hard questions at Jerusalem. Boy, I wish I knew what those questions were. That would have been an interesting thing. With a very great company, and camels that bear spices and gold in abundance and precious stones. She paid a heavy price for that information, by the way. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him of all that was in her heart, and Solomon told her all her hard questions. She questioned, he answered. That's verbal exchange, verbal communication. That's communing. And my last one will be Job chapter 4 and verse 2. And this will plainly let you know that when you're speaking to another, sharing your thoughts by verbal communication, you are communing. I am communing with you right now. I'm making you a partaker of my thoughts. I'm letting you share with me what I think. We are having a communion service. Mind. In Job 4:2, if we essay, that means if we try, to commune with thee, wilt thou be grieved? You know, I got something I want to talk to you about. Is it going to upset you if I bring this up? Have you ever prefaced a conversation that way? But who can withhold himself from speaking? Which is a way of saying, I don't care whether you like it or not. I've got to get this out. You're just going to have to listen to me. But you see, that exchange was communion. From the above definitions of communication and communion, from the above definitions and examples, we see that communication binds persons together. I take what's inside of me, I verbally communicate it to you, so that now it enters into your mind, into your thoughts, and it becomes a link between us. Verbal communication binds persons together. Through verbal communication, one makes another a partaker of his thoughts. To just drive this home, I'm going to give you a quote by someone we all know and love, Jim Ruma. In one of the sermons that he preached in this church, I remember this, it was so good. He said, when you communicate effectively, you share or give a portion of yourself to others. I'm taking a part of me, what I've thought, what I've studied, what I've dug out, what I've put in my brain, and on this paper, and I am giving it to you, a portion of it anyway. I'm not telling you everything, I'm giving you some of it. None of us communicate exhaustively, but we can still communicate effectively. You don't tell everybody everything you think. You'd be crazy if you did that. I know I would. When you communicate effectively, you share or give a portion of yourself to others. They can know your thoughts, intents, desires, fears, etc., to the extent that you deem necessary. When you fail to communicate effectively, people are forced to fill in the blanks, to draw their own conclusions, to guess your motives and intents, to question your sincerity. It is important to communicate effectively. When you don't communicate effectively, you force other people to fill in the blanks to figure out what you're about and what you're up to. So it is important to communicate effectively. Now, to be sure, well, let me make these other points, then I'll go with that. Communication is essential to relationships. Remember, when we communicate, we're making the other person a partaker of our thoughts. We're sharing. It's a form of linking or binding up, connecting with other people. Because it's essential to relationships. Be the relationship between God and man. God speaks to us in His Word. What do? We speak to Him in prayer and worship. God even tells us in Hosea 14, when we come before Him, take with you words. Talk to me. just as He does with us in His precious Word. Communication is essential to relationships, be the relationship between God and man or man and man. You cannot know what is inside another person apart from that person revealing it to you in communication. I can't sit here and tell you everything that's going in your mind, through your mind right now, looking at you. The only way I'm really going to know is if you tell me what is in your mind right now. I don't know how many times Linda and I have been riding along in the car in silence. And I can look at her and tell that mind is whirling. In fact, her lips will be moving. And I will say, a penny for your thoughts. Would you mind verbalizing that to me? I'd just like to know what's going on in that head of yours right now. You've piqued my curiosity. Now, to be sure, we can kind of sort of guess what's going on inside of a person by their body language, by their facial expressions, by their actions, but not always. Have you ever seen somebody doing something and you put this construction on what they were doing, and then when you found out what they were really doing, you realized you had misinterpreted the action? I've come in this church before where I will be really burdened with the message I want to bring. And so my countenance will reveal that. And people will think, have you got some kind of problem? No, you're misinterpreting my facial expression. I'm just really burdened about what I have to preach about today. So you can see verbal communication is really critical to really know what's inside another person. And now, ere I move further, let's get this thing down where the rubber meets the road and sadly sometimes smokes and squeals. And that is that communication is how we connect, how we are linked and bound to others. We let another become a part of us by communicating. It stands to reason that communication is vital to a good marriage. Over the years, when I have dealt with people and marital problems, of which I have had a plenty, I can tell you that one of the major issues that cause problems in marriage relationships is a breakdown of communication. Couples failing to communicate effectively. It is vital. In the Song of Solomon, we have a pictorial expression of a marriage relationship. Rather graphic, in fact. So graphic that some of the strict Jews would not let a young man read it until he was 30 years old. Because by means of very poetic language, if you read it and pay attention, it's a pretty graphic description of the sexual relationship as well as other aspects of the relationship. But I'm not going there with that aspect of how a man and a wife connect. But another thing that emerges very important in the Song of Solomon is the connection they have verbally. They communicate, they talk. And I can prove that with two verses from the Song of Solomon to show you how important this is in marriage. In Song of Solomon 2:8, the bride says, "The voice of my beloved," the exclamation point. "Behold, he cometh leaping upon the mountains and skipping upon the hills." She gets excited because she's going to be able to communicate with her beloved. She's going to hear his voice. Then on down in verse 14, it flips around, and now it's the man speaking to the bride. "O my dove, thou art in the clefts of the rock and the secret places of the stairs. Let me see thy countenance. Let me hear thy voice. For sweet is thy voice, and thy countenance is comely." Does that not underscore the importance of the verbal communication? I mean, and let's face it, as couples, from time to time we fall guilty of this. Something the other does is bothering us. Maybe one wants to talk about it, and the other one I don't want to talk about it. And walk away in a huff. I don't want to talk about it. Just cut it off. Cut it off. We're not going to deal with that. Walk away. You may think by doing that you have ended the issue and the problem is solved. But you're leaving that spouse back there that you stormed out on with resentment building up and anger building up because of an unresolved issue that wasn't communicated and talked out. Consequently, while that's building up, their feelings are changing toward you. So you should not be surprised if they do not get excited about sex. The communication is so important in building that relationship. And you know the funny thing about communication? You know how some couples communicate? They argue, scream, yell, and argue. That's the way they communicate. And they love each other dearly. And when one dies, the other will grieve their loss. And you think, I would think you would be glad to be shed of the problem. But even though it was arguing and yelling, there was still communication. In that excellent book, The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker, if a woman dumps a guy and he was very emotionally needy, and he just keeps wanting to reconnect. And so she keeps getting telephone calls, and she keeps getting emails, and she keeps getting texts. He said, here's what you don't do. You do not respond to that person by saying, I don't want to talk to you. Do not call me anymore. Because when you say that to that person, you know what you are doing? You are communicating. And communication connects. It's a connection. You might be ever so much wanting it to break off, but it won't as long as you keep answering. What you do is you make it, you do not respond to phone calls, emails, texts. You get another phone, you delete them, you do whatever you have to do. If you have to even go out and take out a protective order from the police, giving them no avenue to connect with you. Then, once that's gone, then their emotions can cool and they can go find another victim to feed on in their emotional neediness. That's how it's done. Now, this next one gets me so excited. To quote the words of Conrad Jarrell, I don't know what leg to stand on. This is exciting. Remember, I told you, according to our biblical account, that God made man a verbalizer, able to communicate in language. But here's the interesting thing. Language did not evolve. Man was created by God from the beginning. And I know this is what the Bible teaches, but I shall offer evidence outside your Bible for the same thing. It's fascinating. Fascinating. Talk about the glory of the tongue. Hold your seat. Language did not evolve. Man was created with the ability to communicate in language constructed with words and grammar. Remember those 4 sentences I read to you? I've already done it. 4 sentences. 2 before the fall, uttered by Adam. 2 after the fall, found in Genesis 2, 23 to 24, and Genesis 3, 10 and 12. Man was created by God with the ability to communicate in language constructed with words and grammar. Now, I'm going to list off to you the grammatical devices that Adam employed in those 4 sentences. When I discovered this, it blew my mind. My daughter Jennifer's a grammar Nazi. And I told her about this, and she knows how to diagram sentences and taught her children how to do that. They used to teach that in school, where you would take a sentence and you would break it down into its component parts. I think they do that at the school you go to. They emphasize this at the Bloomfield Academy. Is that the name of it? Bloomfield Christian. When Zach came in, I said, Zach, precious memory. We're going to resurrect some memories here. He said, oh, we're going to be diagramming sentences. He remembered. Brendan took an English class when he was in college, and they were playing some kind of a word game, and he pulled out a sheet of paper, and the teacher said, oh, well, you're not going to need that. He said, well, I'm going to diagram this sentence. She was shocked. They don't teach us anymore. She said, I haven't heard about that in years. I believe we learned to diagram sentences in grade 8. I think that was probably the class in which I got a C-. One of them anyway. I don't know whether that was the one or not, but I didn't exactly ace that. I learned to appreciate grammar and language later in my life, not earlier, sadly. How many of us, after we got out of school, wish we'd paid attention to things we didn't? Oh, we all do. But what I want to do is show you the grammatical devices that Adam used in those 4 sentences. Now, do not worry, please, about whether you know what these devices are or not, or what they mean. Don't worry about it. Just let me reel them off. In these 4 sentences, Adam used nouns and pronouns as subjects and objects. He used adjectives and adverbs. He used indefinite and definite articles. He used a demonstrative pronoun. He used first, second, and third personal pronouns. He used personal pronouns and relative pronouns in the nominative or subjective case, in the genitive or the possessive case, and in the objective cases, both dative and accusative. He used a reflexive pronoun. He used past, present, and future verb tenses. He used verbs in the active voice and in the passive voice. He used predicate nominatives and predicate adjectives. Adam related nouns and pronouns together with prepositions. He used adverbial and adjectival prepositional phrases. He used independent and dependent clauses. He used coordinating conjunctions to connect nouns and clauses. He used subordinating conjunctions to connect dependent clauses to independent clauses. He used a conjunctive adverb to link sentences. He used an appositive, and he used an infinitive as an adverb, and he used an emphatic form of the verb in our English translation. That doesn't matter whether you know the name of those devices or not. Isn't it fascinating to realize in 4 sentences he used that many different grammatical devices? And I can hear your brain saying, fascinating? If you say so. It's amazing. Fresh from the hand of God, using all those. I will explain one thing, just for the record, because this is something that may very well have been peculiar to the English translation of the Hebrew text when I said Adam used an emphatic form of the verb. In English, when you talk about the present tense of a verb, we have 3 ways we express it in English. We use the just standard present tense. I read. We use what's called the progressive tense. I am reading. And we use what's called the emphatic tense. I do read. Or not tense, pardon me, form. We have the progressive form and the emphatic form, all used in the present tense. I read, I am reading, I do read. That emphatic form is one we use to really emphasize what we're saying. Do you like chocolate? You might say yes, or you might respond with, I do. Do you like this heat we've been having? You may respond, I do. Or you may join me with Joe Laba, I don't. That's the emphatic form of a verb. That does not occur in other languages that I have studied. Now, of course, there are thousands of languages, and even now, and many that have gone into non-existence. So whether there were emphatic forms in other languages or not, I do not know. I just know they do not occur in the languages that I have studied other than in English. So in German, he would not say, I did eat. He just wouldn't have said it that way. It would have been Ich aß, I was eating, or ich hab gegessen, I have eaten. That's the way he would have expressed what he was doing. There would not be an emphatic tense, an emphatic mood. Now they have ways of putting emphasis, like they'll put in the word doch, and that will give emphasis to what you're saying. They have ways, but anyway, that's beside the point. But the other languages that I have studied don't have that emphatic form. Spanish doesn't have it, although they do have that progressive form. Like we say, I am reading. You can say in Spanish, yo estoy leyendo, I am reading. Or you can just say, yo leo, I read. But you can't say I do read. They don't have that form. It's kind of funny when Americans are learning to speak German, English-speaking people. One of the things we do when we learn a foreign language, you all do it, is we'll speak that language the way we speak English, which isn't always correct because they order their words differently. They have different ways they express themselves. But I believe I've heard people trying to speak German, and they speak it like they speak English. And so if you might ask them, do you eat chocolate? Essen Sie Schokolade? And they say, Ich tue essen Schokolade. And that's totally incorrect. Tue being tun, do. They're trying to say, I do eat. You can't say that in German. That is not correct. You're just trying to speak German like you speak English. So that's what we mean by that emphatic form. That's that do thing. We do it a lot, don't we? Do you like that we do it? Yes, of course you like that we do it. So we keep doing it because it drives it home. I do, or I don't. Now, so look at that. 4 sentences. All those grammatical devices employed by Adam. Observe from, but here's something. This is absolutely fascinating. Go back to Genesis chapter 2. Get a load of this. Observe from the first 4 recorded sentences. Observe, uttered by man. Notice out of those 4 sentences, the first recorded sentence by man. Let me read it again. When God brings the woman to Adam, he says, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Then the next sentence starts with the word therefore, a conjunctive adverb that links the thought of the second sentence to the first one. So that whatever occurs in the second sentence flows out of what he's just said. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore, shall a man leave his father and mother, shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Observe, however, in the first recorded sentence uttered by man before the fall, it acknowledges the difference between man and woman, male and female. Amen. Did you see that? That's pretty interesting, isn't it? Pretty interesting. This is the first recorded expression of a, and I qualify this very carefully, fully rational mind. You see, ever since the fall, our rationality, we still have it, but it's been damaged. So we don't always think rationally. Sometimes we think very foolishly and think very stupidly, of course. That's what the fall has done to us. But that hadn't happened yet. This is the first recorded expression of a fully rational human mind. Yeah, you got a point there, John. To confound this difference between man and woman, male and female, is to attack the very first expression of the rational human mind, and thus the foundation of all logical thought. If we can't define the difference, if we can't recognize the difference between a man and a woman, we are in bad shape. I was listening to this week to the interview of Kananji Brown Jackson when she was being interviewed. You know where I'm going. Being interviewed to be approved as Mr. Biden's Supreme Court Justice. This woman is going to sit and is now sitting on the highest court of the land, in which it is her responsibility to take the laws, most especially the Constitution, written in words that need to be defined and understood grammatically, and apply that to various cases that are brought to her. When asked by a senator from Tennessee, "Can you define a woman?" she said, "No, I'm not a biologist." And this, a Supreme Court justice that cannot even define a woman such as Adam obviously knew what it was when he uttered the first sentence, the first utterance of a rational mind. We are a nation, a culture gone mad. Gone mad. And yet later on in the interview, after she says she can't define the word woman, she says, "But I know I'm a woman, and I know my mother is a woman." To which I would ask, how do you know that? I mean, this was stupid. There's no other word. A shame. Pathetic. And this, a Supreme Court justice sitting of the highest court of the land? But look at the second sentence. Therefore, based upon this initial difference between man and woman, recognized by the first man, therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Adam's second sentence was based on the first, as I said, evident from the conjunctive adverb therefore. Therefore means in consequence of that. That being so, as a result or inference from what has been stated consequently. So the second sentence is a consequence that results from the first, flows out of the first, based on the first. In the second sentence, Adam defines a marriage as a union between a man and a woman. That word wife, look it up in a dictionary, refers to a woman. When we say that the midwife delivered the baby, what gender do we normally think of when we think of who delivered that baby? Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother. You had midwives, Brittany, you were back there. I gather they were female. Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. This is the definition of marriage by the first and only, apart from Jesus Christ, fully rational man. He defines a marriage as a union of a man and a woman. And this is the first and most fundamental institution of human society. And no Supreme Court can change the meaning of the word. If they are truly wise, they make judicial decisions based on the meaning of the word as it stands originally, from the dawn of time. And some of the court justices that disapproved of the Marriage Equality Act cited that fact, that this is running against the grain of language and history. This definition that was given by Adam was confirmed by the Son of God while he was on this earth, and also confirmed by his holy apostle. Turn to Matthew 19. Now it may sound like I'm chasing a rabbit, but I'm not. I am showing you the value of the meaning of words and how they are connected together in sentences. That is, grammatically. In Matthew 19, 4 through 6, Jesus answers a question posited by the Pharisees. Have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? And said, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. That's Adam's definition of a marriage. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. And what therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. And then the holy apostle of Jesus Christ, in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 31. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. There you have it. That settles it. I just think it's so interesting that these first two sentences clearly delineates the difference between man and woman and defines a marriage as a union between a man and a woman. And we and our culture are veering from that. From that. And then there is this interesting point. Adam's sentence in our English translation opens up with this, pointing to the woman that Adam just gave to him. The word this is a demonstrative pronoun specifying what is standing right in front of him. This. First thing out of Adam's mouth was talking about a woman. And guys have been talking about them ever since. Yes.
You ever heard when Adam saw the woman, he said, "Whoa, man."
I know. That's where the name came from. And you learned that from me. First thing, he looks at her. You know she had to be the most beautiful woman that's ever been. Sin had not entered yet to produce the blemishes that we find that all of us have, no matter how beautiful or handsome we are. And he looks at her and says, "Whoa, man." That's where she got her name. Makes sense to me. Now, these next two quotes, and I'm going to have to leave it with you. I hope I have made things simple and plain enough for you to understand today. But this, I keep saying it's fascinating, but I told you. I said, if you look at the biblical account, it's obvious that man, fresh from the hand of God, primitive man, was made a verbalizer, able to communicate using numerous grammatical devices to effectively convey his thoughts. But this is a citation from page 6 of a book that Larry Walker gave me years ago because he knew I was fascinated with language, and I think he picked this up maybe in a used book sale or something. It is an invaluable resource. Thank you, Larry Walker. And this is a citation from page 6 of the Cambridge Encyclopedia of Language, 1987. Listen to this. Wow. This close quotation clearly shows, that there is no evidence for the evolution of language. That's what evolutionists want to believe. That we started out with they like to think that this is the way we started out, and somehow all that started to turn into words. They can find... Well, that's what they think. That we're just like monkeys and grunting our way into language. That's what they think. But listen to this. This quote shows there is no evidence for the evolution of language. Listen. The fact of the matter is that every culture which has been investigated, no matter how primitive it may be in cultural terms, maybe their culture is to go around naked, living in huts in the jungle and eating insects. But it doesn't matter how primitive that culture may be. It turns out to have a fully developed language with a complexity comparable to those of the so-called civilized nations. They've studied this, studying the languages of these primitive peoples. He said, anthropologically, don't be thrown by that big word. Anthropology is simply the study of mankind, how it divides up into language groups and racial groups, and how they interrelate and where they're located and how they're distributed over the globe, and also their cultures, various cultures. That's what we mean by anthropology. It's just the study of mankind in general. Anthropologically speaking, now listen to this. The human race can be said to have evolved from primitive to civilized states. It's obvious that this quote is coming from somebody that believes in evolution and would really like to find evidence that language evolved. But it's not there. But he says we know that men have evolved from primitive to civilized states. I put something in the parentheses. I believe the human race has devolved from civilized to primitive states. Just look around you. If you don't think that's true, go to Walmart and see who shops at Walmart. We call them Walmartians. All tattooed and all pierced and crazy wild hairdos and all kind of weird colors, and you listen and you talk to them, or like, man, you know what I'm saying, man? I mean, yeah, really, like, oh, I'm really, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Well, I will when you say it. In plain language where I can and then listen to the music, boom, 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 and hear the tom-toms from the jungle. Civilized. I mean, I realize in bygone civilizations they didn't have our technological advances, but understand this: technology and civilization don't necessarily mean the same thing. Just look at how people communicate now with emojis and not complete sentences. People don't even know how to write. All they know how to do is... It's pitiful. It's pitiful. We're losing the ability, and you can't tell me that somebody is behind this, to communicate clearly and to communicate verbally. I did a blog on that, if you look in one of my books, on textese and what's happening to our language. Anyway, listen to what they say. They say that anthropologically speaking, the human race can be said to have evolved from primitive to civilized states. And then I put this in bold print. But there is no sign of language having gone through some kind of evolution. There are no Bronze Age or Stone Age languages, nor have any language types been discovered which correlate with recognized anthropological groups like pastoral groups. A pastoral group would be a group of people that make their living herding sheep and herding cattle, for example. Whereas he talks about nomadic groups. Those are people that don't stay in the same place. They'll live in a place for a while and then they'll pick up stakes and move somewhere else. Some of the Arabic tribes in the Middle East do this. Some of the Indian tribes did this. They were nomadic peoples. And he said it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether they're pastoral. It doesn't matter whether they're nomadic. He said all languages, even of the primitive peoples living in primitive conditions, all languages have a complex grammar. For example, in this particular book, they take some of the languages of the Native American tribes, the Indians, and they'll cite the way it's spoken in the Indian language, and they give an English translation. Ay, ay, ay. The English translation is so complex, you wonder how in the world they understood each other. But they did. And they would just, even little children, throwing these languages around in these complex grammars and forms of communication is truly amazing. All languages have a complex grammar. They may be relatively simple in one respect, like they have no word endings. Chinese is like that. For example, the pronoun wo, which means I. When we use the first person singular, it changes forms in the sentence depending on where it occurs. I can be me if it's the object, or it can be my if it's possessing. I, my, me. You don't do that in Chinese. There's no I, my, me. It's all I. Wo. So it depends on the position of the sentence, whether it's a subject or an object or a possessive. It's the way it is. So people say the grammar in Chinese is simple. I studied Chinese. I have a Chinese grammar book. I went through that thing 2 times. Complicated, complex. Believe me, trust me. They have the most complicated way of expressing their verb tenses, because the verbs don't change forms like ours do. You don't have speak, spake, have spoken. It's just speak. But they don't change forms. So it's simple in that way. But, oh man, have they got a complex system. And that's what this is saying. All languages have a complex grammar. There may be relative simplicity in one respect, like no word endings, but there seems always to be relative complexity in another, like word position. People sometimes think of languages such as English as having little grammar, because there are so few word endings. But this is once again the unfortunate influence of Latin, which makes us think of complexity in terms of the inflectional system of the language. In other words, in Latin, words change forms a lot, depending on how they're used in a sentence. So people tend to think that if a language isn't like Latin, it lacks complexity. That's not true. They're all complex. They are all difficult to learn. He says, simplicity and regularity are usually thought to be desirable features of language. But no natural language is simple or wholly regular. All languages have intricate grammatical rules, and all have exceptions to those rules. They all do. For example, I'm going to test you. How, all you brethren answer at once, how do you generally make a noun plural? How do you make boy plural when you want to talk about more? What do you do? Add an S. How do you make foot plural? Foots? Feet. Exception to the rule. All right. You're going out hunting. You kill one deer. What do you say when you kill two? Do you? You're wrong. 2 deer. 2 deer. You have to put a numerical adjective or you put a plural verb. Don't get smart with me. My grandkids love to catch me in a faux pas grammatical. But boy, let me tell you, I hear about it. Do I ever? They all have exceptions. I remember it was so frustrating when I was learning Russian. She'd say, "This is exception. You just have to remember it." Okay. All right. Let me give you these other 2 quotes, and I gotta bring this to a conclusion. This next quote shows that God created the human mind to think grammatically, and bear in mind all the anthropological evidence suggests it. This is a quote by Francis Schaeffer on page 77 of his book, He Is There and He Is Not Silent. He said, there is a great deal of work being done today on the subject of uniform categories of the human mind. Men like Claude Lévi-Strauss, for example, or Noam Chomsky in his idea Basic Grammar. These men are finding that somehow or other, I wonder how, they are finding out that somehow or other there are uniform categories of the human mind. And when it says a uniform category, it's the way your mind is, it's the way you're designed by God to function. For example, God puts oxygen in the air that we breathe in order to survive. Well, notice God gives us a respiratory system, nostrils and lungs, in order to bring in and exhale that air. See, that's a category of our creation to fit our environment, and language is the same way. So God has created, there are these uniform categories of the human mind. But the Christian says, what do you expect? The personal infinite God who has made the world and put me into it is naturally going to make categories of mind to fit the place where He put me in. He's put me down here, and He said it's not good for me to dwell alone. He's made me a social creature. I need to connect with other people, and He's given me the way to do it. It's called language. And then listen to this about Noam Chomsky's work. The basis of Noam Chomsky's linguistic theory lies in biolinguistics. The linguistic means language. The linguistic school that holds that the principles underpinning the structure of language, get it now, are biologically preset in the human mind and hence genetically inherited. He argues that all humans share the same underlying linguistic structure irrespective of socio-cultural differences. In other words, God created your brain to think grammatically and to communicate grammatically. You inherited this from your parents all the way back to the first parents in Edom. That's why children, just listening to a language, very early learn to communicate in sentences, even complex sentences, and using all these different grammatical devices that they have not even learned yet. Because our brains were created to think that way. And all languages have verbs, have ways of expressing tense, have ways of comparing things, have ways of expressing plurals, have ways of describing things. They all have it. It may be different from one to another, but the basic thing is the same. Why? Because God created us to think like that. God, I don't care whether you like grammar or not, God made you grammatical, able to think grammatically. And that's how we communicate. And that is how our God has communicated to us. Let's leave it on this note that I shan't have time to exhaust. Jesus Christ. Let's bring it to Jesus. The Word. The verbal expression of God. He is the ultimate sentence. The ultimate independent main clause, upon whom all other facts of the universe are but dependent clauses hanging on to Him to complete who they are. I lay down on my couch last evening to relax. My wife and I had cleaned the garage. Oh, what a task. And it was filthy. And it looked so nice. But my back was hurting and I was exhausted. And I lay down on the couch to relax. And then it hit me. The Word. Verbal expression. Jesus Christ. The embodiment. The expression. The incarnation of grammar. I started thinking of the specifics of that. I got so excited. Such an adrenaline rush. I had trouble going to sleep. It is exciting. I hope. How long have I been up here, Brendan?
126.
Oh, my word. I didn't realize I was up here that long. Oh, my. Anyway, I hope you were able to glean something from that. I really tried to, and there's really some exciting stuff yet to come.